So that's it. That was Gone Home. Finished it in one sitting. It was actually slightly longer than I thought it would be, but that's okay. Silas, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So, what do you think? What'd you like? What'd you like? What you didn't like? How'd you like?
Man. I don't really know. I don't really know how to put any of my thoughts into words.
All right. So, what I would do is I would be like, all right, let's start with the things that people talked about all the time when they were talking about this game. The big controversy that hit when this game came out was that it wasn't really a game, for one. For like, secondly, that it was just kind of like everyone was like, oh, it was super artistic and beautiful and stuff, and it was super original. And then there are people who were like, well, it's just like a love story and it's kind of contrived and stuff like that. So what are your opinions on that?
I think the argument that something is or isn't a game is a very silly thing. I mean, I totally understand it, and I get where it's coming from. That if when it's sort of set up in such a way that you don't actually have any real influence on what's going on or the way it, like, what's happening or how it happens.
Right.
I think it's easy to feel like it's not really a game because you're not really like making choices.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Which is the biggest, I think, like, driving factor behind interactivity. Is being able to make choices and then see how those choices reflect. But I think it absolutely qualifies.
I think yeah.
I think I can see why people wouldn't like it. Because I don't think that style, that form of gameplay or interactivity is for everyone. I just think that some people think it's boring, or they want to have more action, or I don't know exactly what they're looking for, but I recognize that there are people who that just doesn't really work for.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where it comes down for me too, at least on that subject, is that it really depends on what you think of as a game and what you were looking for, and it's definitely not for everybody. But I think it's a really cool way to use the medium to tell a story, and it does kind of give you this. I mean, you could write a book or write a. Let me take a second. And we played Presentable Liberty yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And it was kind of a not game in the same way that this is a not game.
Sure.
Big quotation marks, in that you just kind of walk around and the things you have interactive abilities with is not like huge, like it's not a ton of things, but we talked about how that game could have easily been written in like a short story format.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's some way to write this in a short story format as well, but I think it did a really, really good job of developing the world through just having the house and the objects within the house, and like just having the ability. I only used 2 buttons that whole time, right? I have like this interact, and then also this kind of like observe button. So like a pick up, and then you can observe objects. And just by observing objects, like even if there weren't the story cues that were going on, like those letters to Katie the whole time, I think that through just the objects, there was plenty enough for me to, I was in my mind putting together my own story as we were going along that may or may not have been the underlying story, because there was a whole secondary arc, or like a secondary story with the parents and things going on like that you could totally just glean from all the different things you found around the house, which was super cool. And they did a really good job of putting you in the correct direction where it felt like you were exploring, but it was still linear enough that you were running into the objects in a fashion in which you would like put together a story, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And relatively chronological.
Exactly. Whereas opposed to if you had just been like exploring the house and the whole thing was open right from the beginning, You would have gotten the different pieces of the puzzle, but you might not have put it together in the same way. And so I
Yeah.
think being very conscious of how that worked was super cool.
I'm not actually even sure how they did that. You know what I mean? How you create a game to work in that way.
No, me neither. And I think that
Because you are just kind of wandering aimlessly until about halfway through or whatever, when they start introducing places that you couldn't have gotten to without getting those, I guess, checkpoints. But especially at the beginning of the game, I mean, maybe it's just that it's so open at the beginning that the pieces of information you gather don't have anything preceding them, so
right,
it doesn't
matter too much.
feel like it's a story. Yeah, but
But
I also can't imagine the story progressing in a different way than it did,
right. And I
which
think
is awesome.
the really cool part about that too is like you get this feeling about when you read books that for like the first like 2 chapters or so, usually in a lot of really good books, you don't know what's going on until like about a third of the way into the book, and you can kind of start to figure out the story. And even then, as you're progressing through the book, you're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
I had a teacher in high school, and I don't know if you had the same teacher that's the lit teacher. Miss Babs was always talking about how it's okay to be confused about characters and plot for a while when you first start reading a book. Just don't let it intimidate you. Getting all that information, just gathering it, and let it stew in your brain. It's how you put together that story. And I think this did a really, really good job of just being like, here's the information. I'll let you glean from it what you will, and then you can just kind of start putting it together as it goes along. So
Yeah.
I think that was
And
really
as
cool.
soon as those pieces came, at least for me, as soon as those pieces came into existence, they like fit in their little puzzle piece slot in the storyline. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
totally.
yeah. So it felt very chronological, even if maybe it was jumping around, because if there was a date on it or whatever, like, it just fit right in where it
Needed
did.
to. Right.
Yeah, there were no, as far as I could tell, there were no holes. There were things left open,
Right.
but I didn't find any timeline gaps or
Right.
things that didn't make sense or anything.
Right. It all kind of could put together, and I think that's super cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have nothing against this kind of game. I mean, I just got done playing, Telltale. Like, I just got done playing Wolf Among Us, and I really like the whole storytelling as video game is still a storytelling medium.
Yeah,
I think that's really, really
Absolutely.
cool.
me too.
I've really enjoyed playing stuff like that, and I really like it this way too, where it's not necessarily so direct in the storytelling portion. So my opinions on the game, I'm pretty happy about it. At least on the things that were controversial, I think were super cool. Obviously, they're in terms of like, oh, how did it look? I thought for the most part it was pretty enough to do what it needed to do. I had some issues with like textures and stuff, but who cares? Everything that I had issue with was so minor that
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, in terms of like the overall story and stuff, it was just the story was the main part, obviously, and that's cool.
I love the telling of the story through the sister.
Yeah,
And I expected that Katie would be a larger part of the story. Like when we started, I expected she was going to be the main character.
right.
Because that's how games tend to work, and books and stories, that you read things from the viewpoint of the main character. But I love it when that's not the case,
Right.
And also that wasn't even clear right away, like for a good portion of the game, I was like, okay, yeah, like here's this story about her sister.
And what is it going to come
And-
back to Katie somehow or something?
Right.
Right.
And it didn't bother me that it wasn't. I was just, I didn't expect Sam to be the main character of the story. What else was I gonna say? And in terms of the the progression of not the progression, but just the story as a whole, I think I can see where people are coming from with not necessarily it being contrived at all, but it, I can see how someone would look at it and feel like, okay, maybe it's not the most unique story
Right.
ever. But at the same time, what is? I mean, when you look at the story as a story and subtract the details, most good stories
They're
have
taken from
correlating
something
elements,
else. Yeah.
if at least elements,
Most
if
definitely.
not like the same, they meet, they do this, they do that. And the one thing I noticed that I don't even have a good concept of how of what made this way, but like I could tell from the first journal entry that they were going to be romantically involved with each other.
Oh, right, but the first one involving both of them, involving
Uh,
Alani and Sam. Like when the first one, kind of like
yeah,
mentioning
well, I
that there
think
was
the
another
first one
person.
ever was just, yeah, I think the first, maybe not, but I think the first one we heard was her saying that she met a
Oh,
girl.
I met this Lonnie, and things just like sparked. Yeah, no, I got
Yeah,
you.
she
I know
was
what
just
one you're
like, I
talking
met a
about.
girl, or like I saw this girl, and she looked like this, and
Yeah, for sure.
I'll never be cool enough to talk to her.
No, totally.
And
No, I think that's.
I don't know, maybe that's a uh, maybe
Uh,
that's a feeling that resonates with a lot of people.
right. No, totally.
In a when you're
Romantic
put in a
setting.
romantic situation, yeah.
Yeah, I think it
Um,
is. Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, I think that the story. I don't know. I don't think words are working quite right for me
No, that's
today,
all right.
uh, but the way the story was told and the details of the story were unique and interesting enough. And okay, so when when the fundamentals of the story are, let's use the word contrived, even though I don't think that's the right word at all.
No. It was a word that I threw out
Um,
that probably is not the correct one. But.
no, I understand. When they are, maybe sort of uh, stereotypical, maybe. Um, it comes down to like tone
Yeah.
and like the way it's told.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at too. Is like, sure, like you could say it's a pretty formulaic story in terms of it could have been like anybody, and it wouldn't. We've seen it a million times, kind of thing. But I think in terms of like the way that it was set up, the fact that it's an interactive in this interactive medium, the setting is really cool. All the sounds, soundtrack, which I'll go into in a minute, but everything kind of put together in the way that it was made it. I think more. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. So what the story is like, it's not like the most original thing that's ever existed, but like in combination with this really really cool way of doing this that
Mhm.
not a whole lot of people have done before. I know that it's not an uncommon thing, but it's this is kind of the ones that made it bigger, and combined with that and this ability to just kind of put the story together yourself was all
Yeah.
it makes itself a better experience, I think, overall than if it had just been one piece of those things. And I think a lot of people just go into it and go like, well, this little tiny bit is not up to the standards that I think it is, and then it should be, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, and they focus on that one tiny spot and don't kind of see it as a
Right.
whole. And I think as a whole, the game overall, really good. Gone Home overall, I liked it a lot.
Me too.
I enjoyed
It
it.
was very. There's a really good word for it, but it's just like everything fit together. Like, I don't know. It. I want to say it was very contained, but that doesn't really explain what I'm trying to explain. um, it was just a very cool and interesting.
Concept.
Yeah,
And they did a
and
good
style.
job. Yeah, and they did a good job executing it, I think. So
Yes, absolutely.
all for them. In terms of music, I loved. I mean, like the music that was played through the recordings, I think were obviously supposed to be like garage quality. It's supposed to be being done by teenagers. It's punk rock. It's supposed to be raw and stuff.
Mhm.
And in terms of like my headphones are just always too loud, and that going directly from this like kind of ambient, really pretty, like I don't even know what it's like, violet, like strings. I would kind of hear it going on in the background right now, but these strings instruments going on, and just very very ambient music into this really loud music was kind of jarring, but like for the most part, I loved the sound, the way the sound was designed. They did a really good job with the ambient music, They did a really good job with the sound, like the sounds of the rain and the lightning and thunder and stuff. So
Yeah.
that was all really, really good. And it put you in this mood, a specific mood. Not only the specific mood, but it just kind of made it feel more real. So the immersion was really good from that side.
Ooh, okay. So something that I think is really interesting, uh, in terms of mood and setting and just overall like feel, and I think this might have to do somewhat with the setting, like the year. I guess content as well, but it reminded me a lot of The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Both are set pretty much at the same time, and I think they touch on a lot of the same sort of like rebellious adolescent themes,
Yeah, for sure.
you know? And just all in all, I think both, like, that's actually an interesting example, because I think The Perks of Being a Wallflower, if you look at the story, there isn't a whole lot going on, but it's still really amazing.
Yeah, I like
You know what I
it a lot.
mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's a similar kind of thing here, where, like, yeah, if you're gonna look at man does this, person does that, then yeah, you're never gonna enjoy anything if you do.
Exactly. I think I feel the same way about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So overall, I thought it was really, really good. There was one other thing. Too Few Secrets asked this question like maybe 40 minutes ago or something like that. 45 minutes ago. Would you treat it any different? Like, would your opinion of the story be any different if Sam was a guy?
Right.
I don't know if he means by that if it was just like a guy-girl relationship, or if it was a guy-guy relationship, like if it was a homosexual relationship, or if it was a a straight relationship. Would you treat it differently? And
Go ahead.
for me personally, if Sam was a guy, I don't think there would be like the same like sister bond that you kind of feel. I know you can have brother sister bond, but like I don't know. I think there's something just kind of close feeling about it than being sisters together. I think that's super cool. But I think more so what they're asking is if the story in terms of the love interest changes, if that changes my opinion of the story. And I don't think so. I think that they would probably just have to find a different conflict, essentially. Because they basically ham-fisted it at you at the beginning. You run into like 3 or 4 Bibles throughout the whole thing. That, your family's supposed to, like the character's family, Caitlin, Sam's family is supposed to be really heavily Christian. And so like their values supposedly are, and they say in the story is like, you can't be, homosexual, you can't be gay, you have to be straight. You're just going through a phase or something like that. Like that's the conflict. It's not like Montague's Capulets, we can't be together because our families are fighting. We can't be together because my family's belief system doesn't let me. So they would just have to have a different kind of conflict, and I think that my feelings of the story would probably be just exactly the same.
Yeah, it'd just be different.
Right. And I think the really cool thing that doesn't get explored a lot is that when you do have a homosexual relationship of any kind, gay relationship, it doesn't matter what you want to call it, lesbian relationship, there's this dynamic that when you go into a household that like predominantly thinks that relationships are male-female, you get this really cool interaction where the two partners who like each other get to spend more time in close quarters and be more intimate because the family just kind of doesn't think about it as anything other than a friendship. And so you have this like totally other situation that goes on, and they talk about it in different parts.
And they don't even necessarily think of it either. Right,
exactly. And so, there comes that point, it's like, you can't have your door closed when your friend's over. Like, the parents are scared about it and stuff. Like, there's a whole bunch of different scenarios that pop up because of that. Yeah. So, if Sam had been a guy, and if you're saying that Lonnie had been a guy as well, like, if they'd both been guys, I think that situation would have been predominantly the same. In terms of, they would have been able to hang out and do all that kind of thing together. And it would have had those same conflicts. But if Sam had been a guy and Lonnie had been a girl, those kind of conflicts wouldn't be there, and you'd have to have some other, something else to make the story more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This popped in my head as you were talking. It's not completely related, but one thing I found myself thinking about, which has very little to do with the game, is this isn't something I think that the game did poorly or, you know, anything like that. But I found myself really interested by Caitlyn, and I think that's partially because a lot of times in games, especially first-person games, when you are taking the role of that character, you aren't necessarily made to be taking their place as much as doing it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But in this game, they didn't give you much, but they gave you enough to give Caitlyn
A personality.
a personality, and I wondered often her internal dialogue.
Yeah. Okay, so that is also a super interesting part to me as well.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, keep going. I want to talk about it in a second, but if you have more to say.
Yeah, it was very interesting because she clearly has a spirit, you know, and she has this presence that both her parents and her sister, you can catch on to that relationship. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so in a game like, I don't know, like Halo, for instance,
Right.
you're thrown into Master Chief, who's like, infinite badass. You're an infinite badass now. Help us out. Be a badass. And you're like, sweet, I'm a badass. And it's not really Master Chief. It's you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You Mary Sue yourself into Master Chief's giant combat boots.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in this is what I was touching on before as well. Like, in a lot of games, you make decisions and you do things, and even if it's, you know, if you're playing the campaign mode in a game like Halo, then ultimately, yeah, it's going to be the same story no matter what. But still, there is a little bit greater level of, you know, oh, what if I decide to do it this way, do it that way, do it the other way, which still exists in this game, but has it, I don't know how to put words to it, but it just like has a different quality where you don't I don't know, I think maybe part of the reason people had a little bit of a negative reaction to it is because they often want to be able to influence it based on their
feelings.
The way
right.
they think or feel about it.
Right.
And you're given a tiny bit of her own dialogue. You know, there were a few objects that had those comments made by her.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, you're just going, okay, yep, see that, okay. You know, and just walking around that object, this object, the other object.
Right.
But go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so I mean, basically just wanted to reiterate on what you were saying, though. It's just like the whole time you're like, oh, Caitlyn's a character. You're not just like some third party that has no involvement in this whole thing. Like the character that you're playing as in quotation marks, and you're inhabiting for the time being and experiencing the story through their eyes. They're a characterized character. They have different emotions and feelings and a personality, though you don't really get to see it as much. And it's crazy to think like, I want to know what's going on in this person's head as this is going on. Because they throw you right into it from the very beginning, and Sam says something like, you're always there for me, and, you know, it's super hard not having you here right now. You know, so you get this feeling that they're super close, and that and that Caitlyn's super understanding and very has heart-to-hearts with her sister all the time. And then you get these, like, very short snippets, the postcards that she sends back from Europe. And the postcards have all this witty humor it's very cute and funny, and you can tell that she's a smart person, and it seems that she really, really loves her family. And so it's like, it's like they characterize this whole person, and you're like, oh, I really like this character, I think, but I can't really be sure because I don't know what they're actually thinking. I don't know what their feelings are about this whole thing. So, you know, for me, it would be super cool to see that, but I'm also okay with it being open.
Right. That's why I said I don't think it's an issue or it's something that they lacked on. I just it's I like to think about it.
Yeah, it's an artistic choice. I think that they took, and I think it's a risk that they took that kind of backfired for not backfired, but it didn't have positive. It didn't ring positively with a bunch of people, or not a bunch of people,
Right.
but like some people.
Right.
But
I
you
think
know,
whenever paying for something like this is involved, that's when people get.
yeah, and I mean I understand that. I think it was $20, so I paid $20 for this, but it doesn't really bother me. I understand if you don't
Right.
have a bunch of money and you're like, oh, people have been talking a bunch about Gone Home, and then you play, and it's like, I don't know how long it was. It was probably like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, or something like that. You know, people get upset about how much money you spend per hour of gameplay that you get, and if you're
Right,
like,
right,
this
right.
isn't gameplay, and also it was only 2.5 hours, you know, people get upset about that. But you know, you're paying for basically a story or a movie or something along those lines. The way I look at it, some other interactive form of media, if I go to the movies, it costs me like $8.50. Not including all the snacks and shit that I buy. So, you know,
$50.
exactly. And I can go back and I can experience this again at a later time. And
I think it'd be
Be-
fun to do that actually.
yeah, like in a couple of years and just come back and play through these games, and that happens, and I enjoy them. So I think it's okay. Again, when I recommend it to people, I think if I knew the person well enough and I was like, hey, what kind of games do you like? What do you play and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a certain kind of person who enjoys this.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
I have a history with these kind of like narrative games and indie games and cool things like that are not necessarily in the mold all the time, and you too as well. I think that we're a little biased on that, but
Mhm.
yeah, if I would recommend it, I would recommend it to certain people very highly, and then to others, I just would be like, you wouldn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What might you change?
What might I change?
You know,
You
if
know-
you were the thinking force behind the developing staff.
Thinking force behind the developing staff. I don't know. Turn down the volume on the record players just a little bit, like the tape players, or give me the option to turn those down. To be fair, like story wise, I liked it all. I'm okay with the fact that they didn't really go in depth with the parents thing. You just kind of get this glimpse that there might be something going on with the parents, and even
Yeah.
if there isn't, like they kind of root it in your head. So just leaving. I think like good books, they leave a lot of things open to interpretation, especially if they're not super pivotal to the main story that's trying to be told.
Yeah.
Um,
I have something I'll say in a second.
in terms of things that I would change, you know, I don't think there was anything that I was terribly upset about. And I know that I tried to press sprint a bunch of times. I'm kind of glad there isn't a sprint button. Because I really think as much as I was like, I want to
Hold
move on.
shift.
I want to move on to the next part. I think it kind of would have ruined the immersion.
Mhm.
And you know, I just returned home. Why am I going to be sprinting around my own house? You know, I think the
And you've never been there before.
right making you take time, I think was a good way to to help. A little thing that they did. What about you?
Well, what I was gonna say is actually not related to that, but it's related to the way it's sort of what we were talking about before with Caitlin and her character and stuff. Because I think a lot of the time, you mentioned this too, it's open, right? And a lot of the time in games, the game offers you, or sometimes doesn't even offer you, what to think about events or people. The game, like, it gives you the information, and it gives you, like, a bias or a reason to trust or mistrust a character.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's something that in this game there was very, very little of. It was just all there. And there was even, like, you know, you get to read that letter from your father's, like, supervisor or whoever it was, basically just being like, yo, if you don't step up your game,
Yeah,
then this isn't going to work
we have to
anymore.
let you go. Yeah.
Which, to some degree, is implying, you know, maybe that he's not, I don't know, not a super, super hard worker or something. And I don't know. I don't even know what it implies. But because I don't think it applies to anything. That's my point. I
Right,
don't
right.
think the game is saying he's not a great worker, and here's what you think about that.
No.
It's just you take it and you do what you will with that information,
Right.
which
You-
is exactly how life is, and that's exactly how. You know what I mean?
No,
Like,
totally.
It's just there.
You bring in your own biases, and like that kind of also makes the story its own thing. And you know that
Right.
might also be what influenced a lot of people to be like, I didn't really like this game, is because the way
Right.
they're raised or whatever their inherent values are just don't click with this, you know.
Right.
And that's
right.
you know that's okay. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and he was a really interesting character too, and a really interesting example, I think, because like that, coupled with a number of other things. But like, I don't know. I just have interesting thoughts about him, but I don't know how to say any of them, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think he was a super interesting character too. I'm glad that they went in depth with him. I'm sad that they didn't really do as much in depth stuff with the mom.
Yeah, me too. Me too. But at the same time, it was kind of interesting to have a little bit of question, a
Yeah.
little bit more mystery.
Oh,
Um,
I will say that though, that like you get this feeling that the mom is a super nice person and loving person, and then like there was like a really early transcript of I was gonna say manuscript or transcript, and I couldn't
Yeah.
pick one. Transcript of his like book, one of his first books, and it was all crumpled up in the garbage, but like written on pen and uncrumpled by the mom was keep going, keep working at it, love you, honey, like on the
Oh,
pen on the manuscript. So it was like, oh, that's super cool that she's
Right.
helping him with that.
and then he had those big sticky notes that were like, "You need to get better."
Right? Yeah, exactly. You just do better.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One thing that I was gonna say that I was thinking of when I asked you about if they could make anything different. I felt this, and then the more I thought about it, I realized I turned myself full circle on it. I was gonna say I wish there was a little bit more dynamic to the environment, right? Like, oh, it's always raining, it's always stormy, and that's it. But at the same time, given the context of the story, it can't take place in more than one night. And it felt like way too long. You know what I mean? Not way too long, but it was like at a few points I was like, wow, this is still the same day? You know,
Right.
like this is still the same night you got home?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that made it, again, very realistic because, like, it took, yeah, maybe 2 hours, maybe a little more.
Mm-hmm.
If you came home and you wandered around your house doing exactly that for 2 hours, it would still be 2 hours, and it would probably still be raining, and it would still be the same night. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
It's just, like, I'm so not used to experiencing...
A game in like real time, almost.
yeah, basically. And a game that is built in such a way that a static environment the most appropriate.
Right. For sure.
You know what I mean? Because
Definitely.
usually it's like, oh yeah, okay, it's always daytime, or it's like, man, a day-night cycle would really make this cool, or you know, something to that
Yeah.
effect.
Definitely.
Because the flashing, booming, stormy, blah, 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 was kind of, at first it was like, oh, that's a cool atmosphere, and then after a while I was like, oh yeah, it's storming,
Yeah, you just kind of ignore it.
right.
No, I agree.
Ah.
I think static was probably the better idea, and they went with it.
Yeah.
Even though my brain says do other things with it.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, I think that we've said like quite a bit on it. I don't even know how long we've been going for. But my general impressions were good.
Yeah.
But were yours? Assuming the same, similar.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
we're
definitely.
both pretty thumbs up on it, but it depends on the person, for sure. I'm
Absolutely.
gonna go ahead and say that that's gonna end the Gone Home segment of things, and I wanted to say thank you to everybody who showed up, and everybody who did end up watching on YouTube, because this is going up on YouTube on my channel, which is Twitch TV, or not Twitch TV, youtube.com/TheGamingFly, and it's also gonna end up going up on Pyron's channel, which is gonna go Pyron Black. I don't actually know what your URL is, but I'll link
It's
it in
dumb
mine.
and stupid because YouTube is crazy.
Yeah.
But do that.
Yeah, I'll end up linking it in my YouTube video at least, and then also if you guys want that in my Twitch chat, I'm sure that Silas can drop that in there as well. But yeah, that's where that's going to be. And so thank you anybody who watched it on YouTube. Greatly appreciate it. You're all awesome.